So I'll obviously not be able to address all of these wonderful points which have given me so much to think about. A lot of food for thought for my next project too, which I'll briefly flag in response. So if I miss out on something, I apologize in advance, but I think a lot of this is just good food for thought. In response to Roshan, I thought, bringing together the question of political economy, data and welfare, one important way of responding to that would be to share an anecdote. Which was that I did participate. So let me just say that when I was a doctoral student, when this industry was really still in infancy of campaign professionals, getting access as a PhD student wasn't easy, right? Of course, a scholar from Oxford, it opened doors, so let me acknowledge that privilege that I had, but even so, people were just not willing to talk to you. Also because Prashant Kishore's firm IPAC has a clause that its employees are not willing, you're allowed to talk to journalists and researchers for 2 years after your employment is over. So right, there are all of these barriers. But in the last few years, when I've gone back after my PhD and done follow field work, I have gotten a bit more deeper access and I've been able to do participant observation. And in let me not say the year, otherwise it'll give away which state I was in. So because I need to anonymize that. A few years back, I was doing participant observation in a war room of a political party and trying to understand how data-driven campaigning was supposedly functioning in this war room. And I eventually got access to the person who was the data guy for this particular political party. And after much supplication, I asked him that, can you please show me the data set you're working with? And in my head, I had this idea that there'll be some safe cupboard or some drawer that is locked with a lock-in key, out of which a hard drive will come out, which will then be connected, and then will be shown to me behind closed doors. It was basically the laptop was turned around on the table and an Excel sheet was opened on the desktop. And on it was everything from someone's name, date of birth, parents' name, marital status, whether they had LPG connection, their ration card, whether their mother was getting pension from some widower scheme, whether their parents were in the armed forces. So extremely granular detail were lying on someone's Excel sheet on someone's desktop. So data protection is essentially a joke. And if the party is in government, of course they have access to all the beneficiary data. So whether or not it translates into winnability, whether or not it translates into an effective campaign that will allow the party to win is a question we can bracket, and it all speaks to the point that Professor Jay Gudavalti raised about winnability. What does the counterfactual look like? But putting that aside, I think it was staggering for me to finally observe when I got access that how this question of data and the structure of welfare politics that exist, how the two are so clearly linked with one another. And all parties are doing it. But equally, one of the questions that I often would ask politicians is that, do you think hiring these consultants, do you think it's helping you win? And they will tell you point blank, no. They're like, this guy, ye humse aaj 5 crore le raha hai, kal dusri party ke saath jaake kaam karega. They tell you this point blank. And this, of course, also I think Roshan speaks to a point that increasingly, as political scientists such as Nilanjan Sarkar has shown, that the ticket distribution process in Indian politics is deeply imbricated with this financial logic. That parties will nominate those candidates who can self-finance their own election campaign. And then that produces an inbuilt incentive for these candidates with deep pockets to hire these consultants, because for them, this is loose change. Even if they think they're throwing good money after bad, this hardly makes a dent in the larger calculus of electoral money-making or rent-seeking that they're after. Right? So there's also that point. That often parties are engaging in these services not because they feel they are providing some deep value addition in terms of winning elections or not. Often it's an imitation effect and you're doing it because you see the opposition party doing it and you don't want to miss out on it. And it doesn't really cost massive, it doesn't give you, it doesn't make a big dent in your financial coffers should you hire a consultant for your election. Quickly, before I move to Professor Gudavalti's point, quickly on the point of regional capital and big capital. In the book, I discussed this, that the first prominent political consultant that is hired in India before Prashant Kishore is by Naveen Patnaik in Odisha in 2009. And when I first came across that piece of evidence, I was quite surprised because I would imagine it would be a national level party. And maybe this is my northern guys, I would imagine it would be somewhere that is connected to the centers, or it would be perhaps a politician based in Mumbai or Delhi which might have done it. So in some ways, Biju Janata Dal and BJD was a bit of a surprise to me. But after a point, it actually seemed quite obvious. Because of the kind of political economy that BJD, of course, occupies in states such as Odisha, where mining licenses and the kind of corporations that function in that state have a deep implication with the political class there. So it's not surprising at one level eventually that the first case of political consultant hiring and giving this high-level expertise to a political party happened at the regional level for Orissa. And some of you might remember 2009 was when BJD breaks off its coalition with the BJP and decides to contest the Orissa elections alone. And of course, it gives the party a massive landslide. And this decision to break off alliance with the BJP was based on the data-driven work that this political consulting firm called Viplab had done for the BJD. So let me just stop there, even though there's a lot more I would love to respond to and expound upon. To briefly on Professor Ajay Gudavarti's point, I do take the point that perhaps there was an opportunity to push through some of the bigger conclusions. Part of it perhaps is the trepidation of a first-time author converting the PhD into a thesis. But the other really big honest answer, and here I'm looking at Sanya, one of the co-editors of the series, was that I extremely violated the word limit that was set. So it was 80,000 words that my contract said. The final word count of the final manuscript was 123,000. So I was
supervisors and publishers are to blame.
Well, yeah, in that order perhaps. But they were extremely generous with even giving me that allowance. But I do take that point that there was multiple offshoots of the argument that in itself could have provided a much more deeper study of some of these larger conceptual issues. So I completely agree with that point. But I think for me the most provocative point was the one that you started out with. That given the language of technocracy, technical expertise, does this in some ways offset the populist impulse of the politicians that they're electing, i.e., let's just call it Prime Minister Modi in 2014? And then I would say actually no, because one set of scholars that I've been increasingly influenced by, who recently came out with a book called Technopopulism, this is Christopher Bickerton and Carlo Accetti, they come up with a concept called technopopulism. And where they argue that contrary to the assumption that technocracy and populism are these mirror opposites, which is sort of, when I was in grad school, that's sort of what the conceptual frameworks with which I understood these two phenomena. But they argue that actually, notwithstanding the fact that often they can be mirror opposites, they actually have a lot in common. And one key thing that technocracy and populism have in common is a disrespect for democratic procedures. In different ways though, but they share that in common. And what I find so interesting when I look at the industry of campaign professionals is that they don't mind using the language of populism to win elections. So, look at 2017 campaign where Prashant Kishore was hired by the Congress party to manage their election. Disaster for the party, right? But putting that aside, again, questions of winnability aside, they deal in this functionalist language of using caste-based arithmetic and populist welfare schemes to construct a campaign for the Congress party. So do folks remember who was Congress party's CM candidate in UP in 2017? It was a scatterbrained idea, Sheila Dikshit. Because it was Prashant Kishore's idea that he wanted to bring a Brahmin face as Congress's CM candidate. And for him, that was a success based on his data-driven analysis to Congress's victory in that state. Now, I severely question what sort of data gathering took place to give a suggestion such as that. But irrespective of that, that betrays a normative understanding of what caste politics is all about. Do you really need Brahmin dominance once again in a state such as UP, or do you want to consolidate whatever still exists, right? So there's an inability to think beyond the functionality of this caste arithmetic that one sees. So you can use the language of populism, or you can use the language of Bisal, UP Behal, or Kisan Mang Patra. You can create those sort of populist welfare schemes and embed them within your own campaign. But the belief is that once you come to power, you can perhaps negotiate a space for yourself which is far more technocratic. And we've seen Prashant Kishore do this when he helped Nitish Kumar win the Bihar elections in 2015. He was given what was effectively a ministerial level perch in the case of the Bihar Vikas Mission, which of course never took off the ground, but it was that vision that once you come to power, you ensconce yourself within state power, and then you provide these technocratic expertise without being an accountable representative. So I think on the face of it might seem that their technocracy stands apart from the populists who they're electing to power, but I see a lot more in common, and I think the framework of technopopulism is really important. I'm really abusing the time. So let me see what's the best way for me to respond. Quickly on the point of culture, because again that's really something that's interesting to me. So you're completely right. There is this fascination to be the modern day Chanakya, right? A lot of them will also use that term, and there is an actual polling firm which uses that term. Today's Chanakya? Actually, there's today's Chanakya, and there's a newer one. Chanakya now. Yeah. So I do agree. But equally, the fascination is also this allure of American campaign culture. So, when I do pathfinder observation with these folks, they're obsessed with the figure of a David Axelrod or Trump's campaign team. They'll love watching Get Me Roger Stone on Netflix, right? So this is fascination that the American cultural industry has produced about the figure of the campaign manager in US politics. That also they draw upon. So I think culture is very important. There's the old Guru Shishya, Guru Chanakya sort of a Raja and Guru trope, but there's also this American, much sexier trope of American culture that also enters into their political imagination. How about I sort of pause there and maybe I can return to some of them.
Carry it
Another
on.
Q&A.
So we can now